Today I am bringing you a list of my top 10 best horror book recommendations. These are the books that I feel really represent my taste in horror. I haven't read a ton of horror, however I feel like I have now read enough to put together a list like this. I really wanted this list to represent what I love in horror, so if you have any recommendations based on the books that I'm about to talk about, please let me know in the comments, and hopefully you will find a recommendation as well. Some of these are quite underrated, I feel. Some of them are quite popular. But just to set expectations, I prefer horror that leans more literary and that has a particular theme that it's exploring, or that feels more melancholy and sad. I would rather a horror book makes me cry than makes me laugh. I don't tend to like fun horror books or books that have too much humour. That makes me sound really miserable, but you'll see what I mean as we get into the books. So we are gonna kick things off with a book that I read quite recently, and that is Monstrilio by Gerarda Simona Cordova. This follows a few different characters, but the first character that you're introduced to is Magos, and she is married with an 11-year-old son. The book opens, the very first page opens with her and her husband discovering that their son has died. He was born with only one lung, so they never expected him to live as long as he has. However, it obviously devastates them, and Magos decides to, in her grief, she cuts out a piece of his lung. When she returns home to Mexico City, a family friend talks to her and tells her this story of someone they know who was able to grow a person from a small piece of a deceased person. I don't know if I've explained that right, but basically Magos has this idea of trying to grow something from this piece of her son's lung. This is a book about grief, as you can probably gather from the synopsis. However, it's also about so much more than that. It's a book about unconditional love. It's a book about how far a person would go to protect someone that they care about. It's also a book about queerness. A lot of the characters, in fact I think most of the characters, are queer, and it's a book about feeling like you have to conform and feeling like you're not being accepted for the person that you are, your true self. It's really beautifully written, and I think it would be a great book to discuss as part of a group if you have a book club, because I think that there's a lot that you could analyse and look into. Next up we have The Centre by Aisha Manazir Siddiqui. This is another book that I read this year. I read this back in January or February. It follows a woman called Anisa who is living in London. She's from Pakistan, but she moved to London when she was around 18. She works as a translator. She translates the subtitles for Bollywood films, but her dream is to become a translator of what she sees as great works of literature. At the start of the book, she meets this guy who seems to be a savant when it comes to languages, except she tries to teach him a few words and phrases of Urdu, and he can't seem to grasp it until he surprises her by being able to speak the language fluently, better than she can. This causes an argument because she feels like he's been lying to her this whole time, and that's when he tells her about this place called The Centre, which is very exclusive, very secretive. You pay a lot of money to go there, and within 2 weeks they promise to make you fluent in any language of your choice. The story goes from there. I don't want to go into too much detail because I feel like it's better to experience this book for yourself, but let me tell you, this book went in a direction that I was not expecting. At the start of the book I was reading it and thinking, okay, it feels very atmospheric and uncomfortable and unsettling, but I don't really understand why this is categorised as horror. And then I got to the end and I realised why this book is categorised as horror. I really appreciated the commentary on translation and language. Even though the main character isn't someone that I would describe as likeable, I found this just very interesting. I listened to the audiobook and I felt like I was experiencing things with the main character, so would definitely recommend it if it sounds like something that you would enjoy. Next up we have a novella, and that is Night of the Mannequins by Stephen Graham Jones. This is the only book that I've read by this author. It's very short. I think it's only around 100 pages. I listened to the audiobook for this one as well, and it took me like 2 hours. So that's why I feel quite confident or comfortable in recommending it, because even if you don't end up liking it, it's not going to take you much time to get through. And I think you're either going to like the way that this is told and the direction that it goes in, or you're not. It is a slasher, and I don't tend to love slashers. However, this worked for me because of the writing style and the way that it's told as this stream of consciousness, how you're inside this main character's mind. You're inside the mind of this main character, who is a teenager. It's nearing the end of summer and him and his friends decide to pull a prank in a movie theatre involving a mannequin. That's all I'm going to tell you about the plot because it's so short, but it delves into themes that affect young adults, and it has that element of what is going on? But Stephen Graham Jones tells you. It tells you so much without actually telling you, like explicitly, and I just really appreciated the way that this was written. Next up we have Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. This is another fairly short book. It's around 250 to 300 pages. I do own a physical copy of this book and I can't find it anywhere and it's really annoying me. But this I read a few years ago and thought the writing was just stunning. You know when you read a book and you feel like the author has spent so much time and care in crafting the story and choosing certain words and phrases? That is how the writing felt to me. It follows these two women who are married, and one of these women is a marine biologist of some sort. She went away on this deep sea mission that went wrong. She didn't come back when she was supposed to, and everyone thought that this mission was lost. However, she has now returned, and in the present day, so you get that timeline in the past, but in the present day you're seeing her wife really struggle to support her. I thought the relationship between the two women was beautifully written. It was so complex and you could just feel the emotion, and I know that a lot of people pick this up because the past timeline intrigues them, the story involving this deep sea mission. However, I think it's the present day timeline that is the real strength of the book, how it captures that feeling of loss and grief, specifically grieving someone who is physically there but they've changed and they're not the person that you knew. I thought it was just such stunning writing. Next up we have Ring Shout by P. Jelly Clark, another novella. I feel like a lot of the books on this list are quite short, but I really like short fiction or short horror novellas. For some reason it just really works for me where the author only has a set amount of time to tell the story and it just feels really punchy and impactful. But Ring Shout by P. Jelly Clark is an alternative history horror fantasy. The basic premise behind this is, imagine if the Ku Klux Klan were actual monsters, like they are infiltrated by these monstrous beings, and we're following a group of monster hunters who are trying to track them down. Really loved how this blended all of these different genres together. So it is a horror and it is fantasy, but also it feels kind of like speculative fiction. The atmosphere was 10 out of 10. It was quite intense at times and I could picture certain scenes very vividly in my mind. Although I read this physically, I can imagine that the audiobook would be fantastic because this is written in first person POV but in dialect, so the character's dialect comes through in the writing as if you're reading it in their accent. If you're not good with body horror, then I wouldn't recommend this one. Our Wives Under the Sea also has body horror, I forgot to mention that. Just be aware this does have some scientific and medical related stuff which I wasn't expecting. Body horror doesn't bother me, but obviously I know that it's something that a lot of people try to avoid, so I just wanted to mention that. The historical and racial themes are very central to the plot, and if you prefer something that's more subtle and slow burn, this probably won't work for you because it's so short. It does feel very fast-paced and action-driven. Next up we have Sundial by Catriona Ward, who is one of my favourite horror authors. I've read 3 of her books. Sundial is my favourite. I have a few of her backlist that I need to get to, and she also has a new book coming out next year which I'm really excited about. But Sundial, if you are interested in a brief synopsis, it follows a woman called Rob who grew up in the Mojave Desert on this research facility. I don't know how to explain it, but basically her family were scientists who experimented on dogs. So I do want to give a strong content warning for animal abuse. It's quite intense and upsetting, so if you are a dog lover in particular, then I think skip this one because I don't think you'll like it. Rob is married with 2 daughters, and one of her daughters begins to display concerning behaviour. So Rob decides to take her back to her home where she grew up. You're also seeing these flashbacks to Rob's childhood and how she grew up having a very complicated relationship with her sister. So that's all I'm going to tell you on the plot. Katrin Ward's writing does have that element of confusion and ambiguity. Hopefully I've said that word right, but she deliberately confuses you and you feel kind of disorientated and you're not really sure if you're following what's happening or if you're understanding, but things do eventually click into place and I love that feeling. It's a book about family trauma and it's very eerie and unsettling, very character driven and a slow burn, but it just has that quality, that chilling quality, which is why it's one of my favourite horror books. Next up we have The Good House by Tanana Eve Due. Now this isn't actually my favourite book by Tanana Eve Due, however The Reformatory I would say is more of a historical fiction book with horror and paranormal elements, whereas The Good House I feel fits more into this video because I would say this is a supernatural horror. It follows a main character called Angela who has inherited her grandmother's house. Her grandmother passed away a few years ago and she's inherited this beautiful house in Washington state in this small town, and this one particular summer, it's set in the early 2000s, which is when it was also written. This one summer she throws a 4th of July party and something tragic happens. Someone passes away. The timeline then moves forward a few years and Angela is living back in California. She's trying to move forward with her life when someone from this small town who she's been paying to look after this house contacts her and says, look, you need to make a decision on whether you're going to sell the place because we can't continue to look after it for you. So Angela decides now is the time to go back there and make a decision. There are so many layers to this story that I can't even begin to explain, but it is supernatural and it has that slow building dread. I loved the small town setting and the atmosphere, and just I could picture this location. I've never even been to Washington state in America, but I could picture how it looked based on the descriptions. This felt quite nostalgic to me in the sense that it's set in the early 2000s, but it was written at that time, so there's that authenticity when it comes to the pop culture references that just feel so natural and not forced. The magic in this is based on the voodoo religion, or I keep wanting to say voodoo, but I don't think that's right. I think they use both spellings in the book, but the main character's grandmother, when she was a young woman, you see flashbacks to the 1920s, and when she was a young woman, she was known as a healer within the town. She used to sell herbs and things like that. It's a book that I haven't been able to stop thinking about since I read it, and I think it's going to stick with me for a really long time. Apologies if the camera angle has just changed. I had to delete some stuff off my memory card because apparently I didn't prepare properly for this video. But next up we have A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. This is following a woman called Constanta who is one of Dracula's brides, and it's written as if she is writing a letter to him. So it's written in the second person perspective, which I know doesn't work for some people. Sometimes I'm a little bit sensitive to it. However, in this case, it really worked for me because it felt so cathartic. Constanta is basically describing all of her emotions and everything she felt while married to Dracula. He's never actually mentioned by name, but it's very clear that that's who she was married to, and she's recounting all of the abuse that he put her through, and it's just so incredibly written. It evokes so many emotions. It's sapphic as well. This guy, Dracula, I'm going to call him, he brings in several other people to their relationship, so it's poly in a way. Content warnings for domestic abuse, and also if you are squeamish when it comes to blood, there's some of that as well because this does follow vampires. Next up, I had to include a Stephen King on this list, and my favourite Stephen King, maybe not my favourite, but my favourite that I would consider a horror is Misery. This I read about 5 years ago and I'd already watched the film, so I was familiar with the story, but if you don't know, this follows a guy called Paul who is a very famous author, and one day he is driving through the snow when he gets into a car accident and is severely injured. Thankfully, his biggest fan lives nearby, rescues him, takes him back to her home where she begins to care for him. She's a nurse as well. The book actually opens with Paul coming to and feeling very disorientated and not sure where he is, and it's such a tense book because Paul has just finished the manuscript for his latest novel, which this woman Annie obviously wants to read, and she is not happy with the direction that he's decided to take the story in. Because Paul is severely injured, he can't move from this bed, it's very much about these two characters locked in this situation, and it's just so tense. I know that I've already used that word, I think, but it's just the tension. My favourite Stephen King book that I've read in recent years, and it's the one that I wanted to include on this list because there are some horrifying scenes in this that I will never forget. The final book on this list is one that I'm a little hesitant to recommend, and you'll see why when I start talking about it, but Tender is the Flesh by Augustina Bazterrica is one that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. Apparently, according to Goodreads, I gave this 3 stars when I read it. I think of it as a 4 stars, so I've increased my rating, but I had such a visceral reaction to this. If you don't know, this is a book about cannibalism. In the not so distant future, animals have been infected by a virus, which means they can no longer be consumed by humans. Instead of everyone going vegetarian, which to me sounds the most logical, reaction, the government decides to start breeding humans for consumption, and we follow a guy who works in one of these special meat processing plants. Ultimately, this is a book about the meat industry, and as someone who has been vegetarian for over 15 years, I found it so thought-provoking. I think that even though, it made me feel physically ill, the social commentary was fantastic, in my opinion. I completely understand this isn't going to be a book for everyone because it really goes there and it describes stuff in such a matter-of-fact way, because this is just the norm in this future. People have just come to accept it as just a thing, a part of society. If you feel like you can handle reading a book like this, then I think it is worth reading. A bit of a weird note to end on, but that does bring us to the end of this video. So thank you for watching if you made it this far. Let me know in the comments if you have any recommendations based on any of these books, or if any of these books are also your favourite. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Click subscribe if you'd like to see more videos from me, but otherwise I will see you next time. Bye.